Well, today we're going to be talking about existentialism. You might have thought that the Second World War, with the degree of moral clarity that it had, would have led to moral clarity in the culture as a result. That really didn't happen. Now, why do I say moral clarity? Well, from one point of view, American involvement, for example, seemed clearly a response to aggression, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. From another point of view, you could say that Nazism, and especially the policy of extermination for Jews and for others, was something that merited a strong moral response. And so you would have thought that if there are any wars historically that could be justified, it would be World War II. Now, I've partly focused on things like the island hopping strategy, the bombing of Germany, the bombing of Japan, and so on, because I wanted you to see that even in the context of a war like that, there are real moral issues to be faced about how it's to be conducted, and real moral problems that not only we can reflect on and discuss, but that people at the time worried about considerably. So even when the cause of a war is clearly just, you might think there's still a lot of important moral questions to be raised in the conduct of that war. But it didn't seem problematic to most people that the war itself was just. Nevertheless, the response to it, initially, is not one of moral clarity and a sense that now we can agree on certain moral absolutes. Instead, it was something like the opposite. And today we're going to look at one of the main movements that arose in kind of fragmentary form at any rate before the war, but then became stronger during the war and in the post-war era, namely existentialism. Let's start by going back to the pre-war version of this. There are a variety of precursors historically, but one of the most important is phenomenology. Now, this is a school of thought, and by the way, the term phenomenology is still useful. In general, people can talk about the phenomenology of pain, for example, what it's like to be in pain. And that's something that is an important moral question to raise about the nature of mind. You can talk about the phenomenology of a certain kind of experience, what it's like to have that experience. And the general idea goes back ultimately to Kant, who drew a distinction between phenomena, things as they appear to us, as we experience them, and then noumena, things in themselves, things as they really are independently of our own cognitive faculties. Well, the question of phenomenology becomes this. Can we develop a theory of how things appear to us? A theory of phenomena, in his sense, of appearances, of mental events, of mental experiences. So, ordinarily, when we describe the world, we're describing things outside of us. Describe, for example, this classroom for me. Tell me what it's like.
Warm.
Okay, it's warm. What else?
Quiet.
It's white?
Quiet.
Oh, quiet. It's quiet? Yes. At the moment, all too quiet, since I'm asking you questions. Good. What else can you tell me about this classroom?
It has chalkboards.
Good. It has chalkboards. Has chairs, right? Has tables. Has a camera sitting in front of me. There are all sorts of things you could say purely descriptive. But notice you're talking about the classroom, or chairs, or blackboards, or other things outside of you. Now, suppose I say, what is it like to be in this class? Really, being an existentialist, I should say all this in a French accent. So tell me, what is it like to be in this classroom? What is it like? Don't describe the classroom for me. Describe your mental experience. Then what could you say?
Humor.
Ah, it's funny. Okay, good.
It's French.
Yes, it is French. There is something about today that is going to feel strangely French. Alienating, disconnected. I am wearing a black shirt for a reason. Okay, we are going to be sort of getting into this existential frame of mind. And so you might say, all right, there's a way that things feel, a way that a certain kind of thing, is experienced by us. Jean-Paul Sartre, in Being a Nothingness, talks about the experience of skiing at a number of places, where he says, all right, here's what it's like to ski. And he's not describing mountains and poles and things like that. No, he's saying, here's what it's like to have the experience of skiing. And so it's that attempt to describe the internal experience rather than the thing outside of us being experienced. Well, in that sense, it's really something that includes a theory of consciousness, a theory of its structure, a theory of its objects. Here not meaning objects outside of us, but the mental objects that our experience seems to be about. After all, I can be thinking about the three bears in the story of Goldilocks, and that doesn't have to exist in the outside world. It's something I can think about. It's something I can imagine. And so there's a phenomenology of imagination as well. Now, Edmund Husserl was one of the fathers of phenomenology who thought of this way of proceeding as an important way of understanding the world and what it's like to be in the world. His idea was you understand phenomena by isolating them, by taking something and trying to separate it out from all the things that ordinarily surround it. So you see something really essential about whatever this phenomenon is by taking it out of its context. Suppose we're thinking for a moment about the phenomenology of pain, what it's like to be in pain. Well then, he would say, we really understand the essence of this if we focus strictly on the pain. Take it out of its context, out of the ordinary setting, and just think pain. Pain. What is it like to be in pain? Okay? And we reflect on the phenomenon and try to isolate it out of all the other things that are going on. Here's one of the things that makes phenomenology complicated. Our experiences are very complex. Right now, in a classroom, yours is more simple than ordinary because we're trying to focus your attention on what I'm saying and what I'm doing and what's up there on the screen. Nevertheless, it's immensely complex. Think about what you're experiencing right now. You're seeing something right now. You're hearing something.
Tasting.
You're tasting something. Good. What else is happening with your senses? You're feeling certain things, right? You're sitting in an uncomfortable, squeaky chair, right? At a sort of long, kind of cold desk-like thing. What else is going on in this classroom? Luckily, I don't think you're smelling anything. But at this time of year, I can't smell anything anyway. Well, what else? You know, think about your experience. It's all of those things combined all at once, and it's always like that. There are the five senses. There are other thoughts that are going through your head. After all, in this sensorium of your mind, in this sort of cavern or theater or whatever you think of it as, there are the five senses contributing information. There are also thoughts that you're having. As you're aware of all of this stuff going on around you, you're also thinking maybe about what I'm saying, maybe what you had for lunch, maybe that you didn't have lunch and you're really hungry, whatever it is, you're having all these thoughts in addition to various things you're feeling and sensing. So Husserl says, here's the challenge. Try to isolate what it's like to have one of these sorts of experience, pull it out of that context and see what it's like in itself. Well, that's one of the elements of existentialism. What we're going to find the existentialists doing repeatedly is focusing on things in isolation, thinking that's revealing their true nature. It's an important assumption behind the view in a sense that that does reveal their true nature instead of obscuring it by isolating it. But there's a second idea that I want to focus on. We've talked a little bit about the traditional view, that human beings have an essence. We strive for happiness. Our excellence consists in fulfilling our function well. And then we started asking, what is our function? What are we for? What is a human being's purpose? And in what does our excellence consist? And we looked at a number of different answers to that, right? What's really essential to being human? What makes us different from the animals? Well, what are some of the answers that we've considered?
To make, to produce. Emotion.
Okay, good. Marx's answer, to make, to produce. Okay? Another, the Unamuno answer, emotion, I feel. Okay? So we might say it's that I'm a feeling being. That would be this Unamuno type answer. And indeed, Unamuno fits in well with the existentialists. He's sort of a proto-existentialist himself. We also have this Marxist idea, it's really that I make or produce. What are some other possible answers?
Ration.
Good.
I think,
Wait,
therefore
I think. Good. Okay, ration. It's like, yeah, I tell you how much you may have. No. Yeah, rationality. Okay, I think. I am. That idea. I am essentially a thinking being, a rational animal. And so that's a traditional sort of response. That's how Aristotle describes it, for example. How do we differ from the animals? Rational activity. We act according to rational plans, he says. And that's what makes us unique. There are a variety of different answers people have given, as we've seen. The Marxist answer, this sort of answer based on feeling, one based on reasoning, one based on rational activity specifically. There are lots of other possible answers. But now the existentialist has a different approach to this. Says, wait a minute. There's something odd about the question. I ask you, so who are you? You tell me your name. Then I say, no, what are you essentially? I want to know what you're for. That's a very strange question, isn't it? The existentialist says, yeah, maybe there's something wrong with that question. Jean-Paul Sartre describes existentialism as the view that can be put into three words. Existence precedes essence. Now, what does he mean? He means there really is no essence or intrinsic function that defines what it is to be human. It's up to us. We just are. We exist, and then it's up to us to craft our own essence. So his point is really, we're not essentially anything. We're not essentially thinking beings, as Descartes thought. We're not essentially beings that act according to rational plans, as Aristotle thought. We're not essentially makers or doers or producers in the way that Marx thought. We're not essentially feelers, as Unamuno thought. We're not essentially anything. Okay? We don't have any essence. We don't have any intrinsic function, which means our excellence isn't to be defined in terms of how we fulfill some essence or intrinsic function, because we don't have any. We're free to define ourselves as we choose. We are free to define our own success, our own excellence as we choose. So, in that sense, humans are radically free. Not merely free in the sense in which we have free will, we are not determined, though existentialists think that's true, but also that we're completely free to define what our essence is. So if I say, who are you? Who are you essentially? What really are you? You can give me any answer you want. It's up to you to define what your essence is. It's up to you to define what your purpose is. There's nobody else who defines that for you. You're not born with one. It's something you create. Now, he describes this in terms that are somewhat complicated. Being in Nothingness, I think, is one of the most difficult philosophical works that I've ever encountered, partly because he uses a lot of terms like facticity and being in itself and being for itself. There's a complicated argument behind the work, but I think I can put the essence of it, at some risk of oversimplification, very straightforwardly. He talks a lot about facticity. What does he mean? He's talking about a third-person view of the world. I say, he does this, she is doing that. It is there, it's like this, and so on. I'm describing the world in terms of the third person. I'm describing it from the outside. I'm describing something outside myself. And in particular, I'm describing other things that are in themselves just the way they are. Okay? Things are what they are. I can't really affect it. Okay? This chair is what it is. Now, I can break this chair. I can pick it up. I can move it around. I can do a variety of things with it. I can even play bongos on it. But it is what it is, right? Its essence is defined outside of me. It's not up to me what it is. There it is. And our past is like that. What I have been in the past is something I can't change. My past is my past. It's there. It's fixed. And so one way of thinking about this encounter with facticity in the world is, look, a lot of the world is outside of us. It's beyond our control. And even our own past is beyond our control. It's already fixed. It's already determined. I can't do anything about it. But there's also a first-person view of the world, okay? And this is what he refers to as being for itself. We exist for ourselves. We are capable of defining who we are and who we become. And so in that sense, a lot of the world is fixed outside of us. Our own past is fixed. Nevertheless, our future is not fixed. I can decide what I want to be doing now. I can decide what I want to be doing in the future. I can decide what I am now and what I want to be in the future. Yeah?
Isn't his argument precisely that there is no third-person view? Like, he outlines how you would look at it. So the argument is that because any reflection on consciousness is already a reflection on what you made an object, that you're only stuck with being itself. Like when he talks about here in the cafe and conceptions of nothingness. I mean, isn't the argument that there is no third-person view that things could be conceptualized from?
Ah, okay. Is there really any third-person view? Well, toward things outside me, sure. Right? I can describe a historical event. Suppose I'm a historian and I'm describing, what's one of the battles we've considered? The Battle of Verdun, or the Battle of the Somme, or something. I can describe that from a third-person point of view. It's fixed. It's in the past. What it is and what it was, that's something that is fully determinate. I may not be able to know it, but I can describe that in a third-person way, just as I can describe the chair. However, you're right to say when I start describing my own experiences and describing myself, then I'm cheating if I take this third-person perspective. It's not that I think he thinks it's impossible, but it's what he calls bad faith. If I assume that my life is already fixed and determined, and I think of myself, in effect, as in the third person, then I'm really not taking responsibility for myself. So it's possible to do that. It's just, in some sense, wrong to do it. It's cheating to do it. It's irresponsible to do it. So if I'm thinking of things outside of myself, or if I'm thinking about the past, I can, and in fact, I think he would say, I have to take this third-person view, because I can't get inside that any longer and change it. However, if I'm thinking about my present and my future, then, as Taylor puts it, we're self-interpreting animals, and I've got to realize I'm responsible for interpreting that for myself. to take the third person view toward myself there is really to assume it's all fixed. It's what Kant would have called heteronomy. It's what he calls bad faith. It's an attempt to really act as if I'm not responsible for myself. And it's possible to do that. It's just a bad idea to do that. Here's one way of putting it, which I think is a little bit misleading, but nevertheless captures something important. If there's anything essential to us, it is that we're self-interpreting animals who get to define our own essence. And if we don't recognize that, and we act as if that's fixed and determined outside of us, then we're really failing to live up to our own essence. Okay? Now I say it's misleading because that acts as if our essence is not to have an essence and to make up our own essence, and that's got to be essence in scare quotes. So there's something wrong with that way of putting it. Nevertheless, you might say, here is what we're responsible for. We're responsible for interpreting ourselves and giving meaning to our own lives. And to take that third person view toward ourselves is to act as if we're not responsible for that. And so that's why there's something wrong with it.
So it's a third person relation to phenomena that you experience as things in of themselves.
Right, exactly. Now, to some extent, you might say the phenomenologist tries to take a view toward mental experience itself, and does that very view involve sort of mixing up the third person? I'm acting as if my own state of mind, right, is this object that can be described. And indeed, one of the criticisms that emerges in this tradition of that move is that that itself is bad faith. I can't do it. There are some fascinating essays by Derrida in response to Husserl that in effect make that kind of point and say, look, am I not violating the terms by somehow trying to take my experience of skiing, let's say, and trying to take that as an object? That's an attempt to look in first person at something in myself as if it's third person. And so I think Sartre thinks, no, in a limited way I can do it. But if I view my own life as opposed to my own, specific experience, then I'm really cheating. Yeah.
So, smaller question. The word for, we shouldn't take that to be indicating self-interest. We should take that to be indicating that you exist to define yourself.
Right, it's not self-interest. It's not that we exist only for ourselves in a sort of self-interested way. It's that I exist for myself in the sense that I am able to create and interpret and give meaning to what I'm doing. Yeah.
Why is it just the simplification that makes this seem really circular?
I don't know. What seems circular about it?
The defining yourself, and then what you were bringing up, and then additionally when you're talking about, defining our essence, and if we don't define our essence, then we're not living up to our essence. Like it all eventually seems to lead back in on itself at some point, and that's somewhat confusing.
Okay, maybe, yeah, I thought as I did this, I thought if I said this is somewhat misleading, I could do it anyway, but maybe that's a bad
I'll be quiet then.
So let me try to put this all in a non-misleading way that doesn't make it sound circular. If I don't have a fixed essence, then it's up to me, right? Let's take a specific way of thinking about this, which might help. You come to college, is it fixed? Is it determined what you will major in? Now you have to major in something, right? So in that sense, that's fixed. Well, that's not true. You could be Plan 2. Then I guess you don't. Well, anyway, whatever. Suppose you have to major in something, but maybe you don't, right? You could leave college, or you could be Plan 2, or whatever. But now you're thinking, well, what should I do? What should I major in? That's up to you, okay? Now you might think, some of you might think, no, it's fixed. Okay, my parents have told me I must major in business, or I must be pre-med, or, my parents are just big on philosophy. I have to study philosophy. That's the way it is for a lot of us. Yeah. But no, I mean, it may be that you come in thinking it's fixed, but what Sartre and the other existentialists would say is, no, it's not fixed, it's up to you. Okay, nothing has forced you into a particular path. You might have talents in a certain area, it might make a lot of sense for you to go in this direction, but ultimately it's your choice. And in the end, it will be your responsibility because it is your choice. You can't very well major in one thing and then later say, oh wow, that was awful and it's all my parents' fault, they made me do it and so on. No, it's up to you, and it's really your choice, your decision, your responsibility. That makes you free, but it's also scary. Because you can't point the finger outside of yourself and say, it was my circumstances, it's this, it's that, it's this other thing, it's George W. Bush, whatever it is. You can't really point at something else and say it's all that person's fault or all that institution's fault or all that situation's fault. In the end, it's up to you. Now, here is a way in which this really stems from the experience of the French in World War II. In World War I, the Germans invade France. France resists. The war is a stalemate for 4 years. What happens in World War II? The Germans invade. The French resist. Paris is taken within 6 weeks. Okay, that's a national humiliation. The French respond in a variety of ways. Some collaborate with the Germans. Some just duck their heads and try to get on with ordinary life. Some join the resistance. And their thought is, it's not determined for us. Despite this external calamity, it is not determined for us how we will respond to the Nazi occupation. We can respond in this way, we can respond in that way. And partly here, Sartre, Camus, and others are calling people to resistance. They're saying, even if you're in the worst possible circumstance, even if your country has been invaded by an enemy that is truly a vicious enemy and a deeply immoral enemy, even if you are put in a very difficult position, you still have freedom. You have the freedom to resist. You have the freedom to respond to that in a variety of ways. And ultimately, it's your responsibility. You can't just say, oh, the Germans made me do it. I was under orders, or blah, blah, blah. They're saying, no. Even if somebody points a gun in your head and says, at your head and says, you've got to do something, it's up to you to say no. Okay, you do have a choice even in that kind of case. And so the point is partly, look, we are responsible for ourselves. Nobody can actually force us to do anything. And the fact is, we're therefore morally responsible for everything we do. Yeah.
Does this make this theory like the enemy of a lot of economic theory?
Is it the enemy of economic theory? An interesting question. It's certainly the enemy of an economic determinism. Okay? Now, insofar as an economist can say, well, of course people make free choices, and often they're rational choices. There's nothing here, I think, that undermines that. However, if you have the economics in the sense of a Marxist economics that says actually people are fixed and they're determined by these large material forces, then yeah, this is the direct denial of that. Now, at the end of his life, Sartre actually became a Marxist and thought they could be reconciled. But I think most existentialists have thought, no, that's the opposite view. You can't be a determinist and hold this kind of view. What sense does it make to say we're free to fix our own essence if we're not free to do anything? Yeah.
So then would you consider Viktor Frankl to be a micro version of this? Like the idea, like when he's talking about how everyone has the capability to hope to change their position, like because he was a Holocaust survivor, he wrote about...
Right. Yeah, okay, yes. A lot of people responded to the war in a variety of ways. But yes, Frankl is a good example of somebody who looks at the suffering and says, that doesn't determine meaning for me. It's up to me to give meaning to that. Okay, so there is a kind of existentialist, as we'll see, that takes this in a direction of despair, meaninglessness. If life has no intrinsic meaning, then we are all, simply going through life. The response to this is boredom, and so on and so forth. But another response is to say, look, there's something immensely liberating about this view. If no matter what's going on outside, no matter what happens to me, if I'm ultimately responsible, not only for what I do, but for my assignment of meaning to that I can take the worst possible circumstance, and I'm free at least to give that circumstance a meaning. And so you can see this as, you might say, a license to create art, to create beauty, to create meaning, even out of the worst materials. And so in that sense, you can, I think, take the freedom the existentialist gives you and use that in highly productive and positive directions. Now, as Sartre sees it, our central problem is really just existence. What does it mean? Here we are, right? We didn't ask for this. We just happen to be here. What does it really mean? And what drives him and various other existentialists is the theme of absurdity and of alienation. Why? Because you go through the world initially thinking things do have a meaning that's assigned outside of you. You think, noticing the facticity of the world, noticing that you're not responsible for lots of it, and that lots of it is just fixed. You think, well, okay, things must have a purpose, they have a meaning intrinsic to themselves, but at some points it dawns on you. To put it in Pirandello's terms, the mask slips. At certain points you realize, wait, that meaning, that significance, those purposes are not intrinsic to the things. They're things that I've been assuming, but they're not really intrinsic to the way the world is. And at that point, you get these confrontations with absurdity. You feel alienated because you realize things don't have the natures or purposes you thought they had. Now, Camus puts this in a very dramatic way. He says the central philosophical problem is that of suicide. Now, why suicide? Well, because, you might say, the real question, the fundamental question of philosophy is just, does life have any meaning? Does life have a purpose? And what does suicide have to do with it? Well, the thought of, if it doesn't, then what's wrong with suicide? If it does have a purpose, then it would seem as if suicide is a negation of that purpose, unless you're, of course, in an extreme circumstance. Even Kant, who thought suicide was intrinsically wrong, nevertheless believed that it could be justified in some circumstances. If you've been captured, let's say, and are about to be tortured for information, he thinks it's okay to take the cyanide pill so that you won't divulge that information. But Camus is asking a different question. Is there really any point to living? Why stay alive? The question of suicide from his point of view is really, what's the point of living? Okay, and if there's no positive answer to be given, isn't that disturbing? Doesn't that mean, well, at least there's nothing really wrong with suicide? It's a choice like any other. So his real question is, what's the point of living? Now, how could that question be answered? What is the point of living? What is the point of it all?
To find your own point.
Ah, to find your own point. Good existentialist answer. That's really, in a sense, the answer he comes up with in the end. But it's the question he wants you to grapple with. Not because, I mean, there's a stupid way of putting this question. I think I told you about the professor from A&M who once came here and gave a talk. He thought all first graders ought to be given the option of suicide. Offered, little pills that they could take if they decided they didn't want to live. I right away thought, yeah, I'm glad I'm not teaching at A&M. But in any event, it's not that sort of point. It's not that he thinks, okay, you're now of adult age, it's time for you to think about whether you want to live or die. No, he's really saying, look, we are forced to confront the most fundamental question. If we ask, what's the point of it all? What's the point of living? What's the meaning of life? That's really the fundamental question that philosophy ought to be about. It's not really ultimately about logical puzzles or this or that other thing. It's really about what's the point of living.
But what's the point of having a point? Like, do you even need to have a point for life to be necessary? Because you could continue on living before you actually find if there is a point. So why would you need to commit suicide to negate that?
Well, all right, no, good question. What's the point of having a point? Okay, it's her question. And to not go on, I mean, that's a good point. Now, why am I saying that? Well, look, you can say, wait a minute. Okay, suppose Camus says, oh, the central question is suicide. Is there any point to living? Does life have a meaning? Suppose it doesn't. Suppose I don't know, suppose you're this guy who just goes through life thinking, yeah, how are things going today? Pretty good, not hurting too much. Things seem all right. Got enough to eat and so on. So somebody says, so why not commit suicide? So, what do you mean? Things are all right. What's the problem? Okay? And so, the average person is going to respond to this and say, why is this an issue? I'm not depressed. What's your problem? If you're thinking about suicide, then, that's a sign, unless you're in desperate circumstances, like you're being tortured for information or something, this means you should go to a doctor and talk to somebody about your problems and maybe get on medication, blah, 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 right? They're not going to see it as a philosophical problem. They're going to see it as a psychological problem. And so you might think, yeah, what's really motivating this? Now, here's one sort of answer in sort of intellectual history terms. Look, these guys just got their butts whipped by the Nazis, all right? That's pretty depressing. So France as a country is depressed. They're discouraged. There's like, oh, we have been shown to be idiots by these German dogs. So, what's the point? Now, that's not my preferred explanation. But that's one way that some people have responded to this. Another way of responding to it is to say, well, look, there's a very serious question to be raised about the meaning of life. And it's precisely in the confrontation with, well, with a variety of things that question comes to the fore. One of them is the kind of raw evil that was on display in World War II. Confronting that kind of evil can make you think, wait, what's the point of existence anyway? What's the point of life? It's not just defeat, it's not just discouragement or a sense of self-doubt that arises out of that. It's a real confrontation with evil. That can make you think, wait, the world is like this? These guys can actually win? And that can make you think, what's the point of it all? What's the world all about? What's existence all about? In a way that isn't just, hey, I'm discouraged because we're losing this war. Here's another way of thinking about it. We're doing a variety of things every day, right, for purposes that we choose. You're in college right now, you're doing all these things that are assigned from the outside, but look, they're not forced on you. Nobody's making you be in this class, for example, or to write a paper or to do anything else. And so you might think you've chosen a lot of these things. Sartre calls them projects. Some of these projects are very small, like I'm going to go eat lunch. Others are much larger, like I'm going to get a college education and so forth. But you're engaged in a variety of projects. How do you justify the small ones? Well, often in terms of larger ones. Why are you taking this course? Well, because it's part of your education, right? You refer to some whole. Now, suppose we keep doing that. We say, why are you trying to write this paper? Ah, because I want to succeed in this class. Why do you want to succeed in this class? Well, it's part of my education. Why do you want to get educated? Well, for a variety of reasons, right? For many of them involving larger things in your life, like having a career, having a job, blah, blah, blah. Why do you want those things? Well, you want to be happy, says Aristotle. That's the biggest possible answer. But now you can say, well, why do you want to be happy? What's the point of the whole thing? Why play this whole game? Okay? And the existentialist is asking that kind of question. That's not just in response to a historical event. It's not just in response to a confrontation with absurdity or evil or something like that. It's an attempt to say, we make sense of our smaller projects in terms of larger ones, and finally we get up to an entire life, and we say, what's the point of that? What's that whole big project? This is an important part of my life. Ah, I'm living my life. Well, what's that project like? Tell me about that project. What's involved in living a life? And that's the question he's really trying to raise here. What's the point of living a life? What's the point of it all? Okay? And from this point of view, that's not just some contingent question that arises in a certain historical circumstance. That is the biggest philosophical question of all. What's it all about? And, you know, if you can't answer the worry is, then all those micro things you had talked about before, what's the point of eating lunch if there's no point to living at all? What's the point of being educated if there's no point to living at all? And so on. So in that sense, I think he's trying to say, think about what we usually do. We think about the meanings of smaller things in terms of bigger wholes that they're a part of. Finally, you get up to the whole life, and all of a sudden, what's that all about? How can you answer that? Yeah.
I don't understand why, if something doesn't have a point, why it has to be immediately negated.
Oh, no, it doesn't. I mean, he's not saying that if there's no point, you should commit suicide. He's just saying there's no good reason why not to.
Well, there's no good reason to. Like, I just don't see...
Yeah,
like, when you were talking... Well, the reason why I was asking that is because when you were saying if there's no point of living and why eat lunch, well, why not eat lunch? Like, if the same question is there's no answer, then it shouldn't matter. You should just do.
Right. Well, okay, yeah. I mean, yes, if there's no point to anything, he's not saying, oh, let's go kill ourselves. Okay, there's no point to that then. But there's nothing really ultimately wrong with it. Now, most existentialists don't phrase it this way, and perhaps I've been mistaken for phrasing it that way and following him. This is how he lays it out in the Myth of Sisyphus, which is usually considered his main philosophical work. But if it's misleading in a way to put it in that fashion, I think he's trying to put it very starkly. He's trying to say, what is the point of living? And if there's no answer, it's not that, oh, then I have to die. It's just that that's already a pretty disturbing answer, isn't it? Really, what's the point of it all? What's the point of living? If there's no answer like that, there's no point. That's kind of depressing, isn't it? Or at least the first reaction to that, it seems to me, would be discouragement. By the way, what's the traditional answer to that? What would a religious person in the 19th century have said is the point of living?
To live on in heaven. To go to heaven, basically.
Ah, okay, yeah, to think in terms of something larger than an individual life, right? For example, a relationship with God, or to be part of this broad story that God creates. That's one possible answer that goes beyond the bounds of a human life. What's another one? Often people in their deathbeds think about their families. Okay, I can remember my grandmother as she was dying, thinking, well, I've led a good life. I was a good wife. I was a good mother. I had 3 children, and they've had families, and blah, blah, blah. And she talks about her role in something larger than herself. She was reminiscing in those last days a lot about her parents, about her grandparents. She starts seeing herself as part of this larger historical picture. And so a traditional way is to say there's something bigger than an individual life to refer to. The life of that family, or the life of that polis, that community, or the life of that nation, or the life of humanity as a whole, or God's plan, or something. And the existentialist in part is saying, that's cheating. That's denying your own responsibility. No, it's got to be found within its own terms. And so it's trying to take the traditional strategy for answering this and undercut it. Yeah.
Well, even if that's not cheating, that's outsourcing, right? Like at the end of the day, you're like, well, the purpose of my life was to further my family and my country's life, and then it's like, well, what's the point of your family and your country's life?
Okay, good. That's in a sense the appeal of the traditional religious answer. Because if I go beyond my own life to say, but look at my family, I've been part of this larger family, you can indeed say, well, what's the point of that family's life, right? If I say, I've helped my nation, well, what's the point of that? It looks like only if you get to God can you really say, well, God's supposed to be his own point, right? Or, I don't know, God knows, whatever. Then the idea is supposed to be you're at a broad enough canvas that really it's supposed to justify itself. But as long as you stay in any kind of human terms, to move from one human being to a group of human beings doesn't seem to help. You can keep asking the same question. Now, yeah, I don't want to go... Well, no, I do want to talk about this a little bit. One of the figures that's important in the history of existentialism is Martin Heidegger. He's pictured here. He wrote a long book called Being in Time that is more difficult than being in nothingness. I guess time is more difficult than nothingness. I don't know. Anyway, he describes authenticity as the norm of self-identity. If I really have no essence, then who am I? Well, it's up to me to decide. The only thing, he says, that really can govern that, since I can't find any moral authority outside me that can govern that choice, it must be something from within me. And the only norm he can find within himself is authenticity. Now notice it's not authenticity to something outside, true, being genuine to something outside. It's not even being true to yourself, because when I put it that way, it sounds like I do have a nature that I have to be true to. This is a question of defining myself however I want, but simply taking responsibility for that and being genuine, being self-aware that that's exactly what I'm doing. So, yeah. We could think of it this way. I give my life meaning through the projects that I select. And what I do is up to me. But my range of choices is not up to me. He describes us as being thrown into the world. That's a German term that means this sense of thrownness. I'm thrown into the world in a way not of my own choosing. I can choose, within the frame of reference that I have, many different things, and I'm responsible for that choice. But there are certain things I cannot choose. I cannot decide to become an ancient Roman general. Okay? It's just not part of my field of choice. I cannot say, here's what I want to do with my life. I want to go back to ancient China before Confucius and say it all before he said it. Sorry, too late. Can't do it. Okay? I can't decide I would like to live the life of a Nigerian goat herd in the 17th century. Nor can I decide I would like to be Captain Picard and jump forward to the 24th century and captain a starship. No, I've got a certain set of historical choices in front of me. I'm thrown into the world at a certain place, at a certain time, with certain choices that are available to me, and that part I'm stuck with. Now, he says, something important follows from that. I inevitably feel alienated from that. It's a purely contingent matter that I've been thrown into the situation I've been thrown into. Now, given that, I can feel free to... Here's one way of putting it cynically. I am free to run through the maze I'm given, however I choose. But the maze I'm stuck in by the nature of circumstances. I'm not responsible for that. And that means I can feel alienated from the world. Now let's talk a little more about authenticity. In what sense is that a constraint? Now, I do some things because there's an external authority that tells me I must do them. Okay? Why do I pay my taxes? Because it's part of my own sense of self-identity? No, because I'm forced to do it by law. Other things, it's just what one does.
Social conventions.
Right, there are social conventions. Somebody says, hi, pleased to meet you. And I respond with, yeah, happy to meet you, or how are you, or blah, blah, blah. Why do I do it? Well, it's what one does, right? It's social convention, it's expectations. But I may also do some other things because I choose them. That's authenticity, recognizing the things that I choose because I choose them for what they are, my own free choices. To live inauthentically is to live in bad faith, as Sartre puts it. It's to take that third-person view toward things that are properly first-person and act as if they're given to me when they're not. They're things that are, in fact, my responsibility. Okay, so, yeah.
So authenticity is acknowledging, like, social norms, but still, like, acting on your own?
Right, and recognizing that your own choices for what they are, namely your choices. Taking responsibility for your own
And
freedom.
that differs from like the other with the because like purely third person, like it differs because
Well, okay, yeah, let me tell you the story of a friend of mine. He became a lawyer and was a very successful lawyer, had a big house and a fancy car, and ended up rising through the ranks, arguing a case before the Supreme Court, as a matter of fact, which is a big deal if you have a career in law. And so things were going very well for him. But it was around that point that he began to feel alienated from everything he was doing. And he started realizing, yeah, why have I done any of this? Why did I go to law school? Well, because I thought it was expected of me, not really because it was something I wanted to do. Why did I get this job as a lawyer? Because I felt that it was expected to me. Having gone to law school, it wasn't really my free choice. It wasn't something I really wanted to do. I dreamed of arguing a case before the Supreme Court. Now I've done it. And guess what? I don't feel happy. I don't feel fulfilled. This isn't something that makes me jubilant. And he suddenly realized, wait a minute. I can get to the top of this profession, fulfill every dream, and it still doesn't make me happy. Why am I doing this? And he came to feel that all of it he was doing because it was expected of him. It's what people who were majoring in that happened to do. Other classmates of his were doing it. And then he graduated from law school. Well, what are you going to do except find a job as a lawyer, blah, 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 blah. And he realized, I've been living my whole life by a set of expectations that other people have had of me, or because other people around me were doing it. This isn't what I want to be doing at all. And so he quit. And he went back to graduate school and became a professor of political science. And he lost the house, lost the car, lost the wife in the process.
Does he like what he does?
But the way he describes it is, well, now I love every day. Then I had all this stuff that was an indicator of external success, and I hated my life. Now I lost all that, but I love my life. Okay? And from an existentialist point of view, it's like, well, yeah, you were doing all that other stuff because either somebody was telling you to do it, or somebody was encouraging you to do it, or you thought it was just the thing to do, given someone in your circumstances. Now you're living a life that you're actually choosing, and that makes a huge difference. And you recognize it as your choice. So Sartre is in a way saying, stop living your life just on the basis of other people's expectations. Start making your own choices. And that authenticity is recognizing that these things are up to you and actually taking responsibility for it. Despite all of that, sometimes we're just forced to confront the meaninglessness of existence. Check it and say, why do we exist? Well, I can't speak for you, but I'm here for the margaritas. At times, we break through these things. We confront what Camus refers to as absurd walls. Claire suddenly realized that existence precedes essence and that she was free to kill all the old gods. Yes, well, anyway, if you haven't seen them, I really want to encourage you to look at the videos of Henri, the existentialist cat. The one where he goes to the vet, I think that's the third one, is especially fine, though episode 4 is Halloween. That's also wonderful. If you go to the slideshow and click on this, it's a link to the vet episode. I was going to show it to you in class, but I've been going on far too long about the problem of suicide. Anyway, I alone feel this torment. I am free, and then somebody picks him up and puts him in his cat carrier. He goes to the vet and says, yes, I go to the doctor, but he cures nothing. I tell him about my growing depression, my alienation from existence, but all he does is check for gunk in my ears. That's all, it's marvelous. Anyway, sometimes we really do confront the absurd. We're seeking meaning, we can't find it. And we realize that in some odd sense, we're not what we are. And we really are what we are not. That's a kind of paradox that is almost Zen-like, and that also has its roots, by the way, in the Christian tradition, when Paul is talking about how he doesn't understand himself, he finds himself doing what he hates, and unable to do what he really wants to do. There are times when we confront that in ourselves. There are times when we just see things out of context and it feels absurd to us. There are times when we suddenly realize that things don't have an intrinsic purpose, but it's all up to us. And we suddenly find that disorienting and disturbing. So, yeah, I've got a variety of little things about this, but let's get on to the point about Camus' actual work of literature, which I now have 4 minutes to discuss. Camus was born in Algeria, born very poor, by the way, in Algiers, and grew up in North Africa. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957. He was the second youngest person to Kipling ever to receive the award. He was also the first African-born writer to receive the award. As you can see, he was a very dashing figure, someone who sort of combined French existential philosophy with the atmosphere of James Bond. Like, look at that photograph. Right. There's another one. Right, dramatically confronting the meaninglessness of existence. He flirted with communism, even became a communist at age 22 in the 1930s, but he was thrown out of the party 2 years later when he raised questions about Stalin's show trials. He then became an anarchist and a pacifist until the Germans invaded France and began executing people when he decided pacifism wasn't the right strategy. And he joined the French resistance in 1942. Now, all of this can make him seem a bit flighty, but I don't think that's what's going on here at all. He thought the Communist Party represented a high ideal until he saw the reality. Then he thought, well, maybe all government is a mistake. But then he thought, in effect, it was a sort of Gandhi-like idea. Treat other people with peaceful intentions and they'll be peaceful to you. And then he encountered the Nazis and realized, wait, they won't all do that. And so joined the resistance against the Nazis. Now, there are a variety of things he points to as confronting us with the absurd. Weariness with the routine. Sometimes you're doing something just because it's what you always do and you stop and think, why am I even doing this? Sometimes you see something out of context. You see people talking behind a glass wall, for example, and you realize the whole thing seems absurd. You recognize your own inability to act or understand. You find something incomprehensible, or you realize you're powerless to stop something and you feel the sense of alienation from it. Now, here is his goal, to live without appeal. I'm so tempted to tell you a joke. One banana says to the other, what's your plan to live without appeal? Yeah, sorry. You hang around philosophy departments long enough and you hear a lot of bad jokes about things like this. We create our own meaning is the idea. There's no outside authority that can tell you what the purpose of your life is. There's no standard outside of yourself to be held to. It's an internal standard. And so he says, I draw from the absurd three consequences. My revolt, my freedom, and my passion. My revolt, because people who try to impose authority on me from the outside are doing something wrong. My freedom, it is up to me to choose my own essence and the plan for my own life, my own purpose. And my passion, there is no reason to feel alienated from that, since after all, this is something I am actively choosing. And so, I should live a life of revolt against people who are trying to impose their visions on me, a life of freedom where I take responsibility for my own life and my own purposes, and my passion, I should embrace whatever projects I engage in with real passion, knowing that they are defining me. Well, in some respects, this leads Camus to important philosophical insights. It also leads him into personal troubles. Here are his two wives, Simone, who turned out to be a drug addict, and they were quickly divorced, and then Francine. They had 2 children together. Nevertheless, he was a notorious womanizer. After all, if you have this life where you reject all external authority and define your own self by your passion, well, here are some quotes from letters to mistresses. I will soon be returning to Paris. He says, this frightful separation will at least make us feel more than ever like the constant need we have for each other. Next day, just to let you know, I'm arriving on Tuesday by car, blah, blah, blah. See, I'm laughing as I write. He wrote, see you Tuesday, my dear, I'm kissing you already, blah, 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 blah. There was another letter setting up a date to meet someone in New York. Anyway, here's what's remarkable about these letters he wrote in December of 1959, all on the 29th. They were all to different women. So there's a danger of this sort of flightiness about one's projects. But nevertheless, what he's really trying to say, and this is the broader important point, is, look, in the end, you really are responsible for your own life. And if your projects are small and flighty, that's your problem. Really, he says, to skip, I now have negative 15 seconds. So I'll just go to the last thing. The brutal certitude is what he complains about in the prison. He seeks a loophole. He's sickened by the brutal certitude of his impending death. Why? Death is the one thing that really is imposed on us. Here is one thing you cannot choose, in addition to being a Nigerian goatherd of the 17th century or an ancient Roman general, you can't choose to be immortal. Your mortality really is something imposed on you. That's something forced on you. You're in the same condition as the stranger who is there in the prison cell. Why? Because we're all sentenced to die. It's just a question of when. And that, he thinks, forces us to confront the meaning of existence in a much more brutal and direct way than we might if our lives extended infinitely.